So today we've got quite a lengthy title. We've got natural history studies for rare diseases, the importance of collecting real-world data from patients to enhance the development of therapies. And we're really happy to be delivering this with some excellent speakers in collaboration with Healx. And we've chosen to focus on natural history studies. We've done a lot in the past on registries and on collecting patient data and real-world evidence. And we thought this was kind of a natural fit to kind of carry on that discussion and that topic. And obviously natural history studies are really important in rare diseases. We have a lot of expert patients and they know they've been collecting that data for a long time. So it's important that we compile that data, put it together and use it to actually develop treatments. And of course, often rare diseases are multi-systemic. So it's important as well that we can identify patterns through collecting this kind of data. And I'm joined today by these lovely speakers. We've got Nasha Fitter, who is CEO of FOXG1 Research Foundation and also Director of Rare Diseases at Citizen, Kasim Javed, who is also at the University of Oxford, and he is an Associate Professor in Metabolic Bone Disease. And then finally, Neil Bennett, who's Head of Research at Action Duchenne. And I'm also joined by Mira from Healx, and she's going to introduce in a minute a bit more about the Healx side and why we've kind of chosen to run this webinar. So if you're brand new to Findacure, I know we have some new people in the room today. We're a rare disease organisation which envisions a world in which all rare diseases have treatments, made together with patients for patients. So we're there to train and to really support patient organisations to help their patients in turn. And kind of within our ethos, this is what we do. We empower patient groups, we promote repurposing, and we build a rare disease community to accelerate treatment development, which is where this webinar fits in. And in general, our webinars fit into our empowerment program, which also includes workshops, e-learning, and other ways that we can support patient organisations. And I'm just going to quickly pass over to Mira now to give a bit of an introduction to Healx and why we've chosen to run this webinar.
Thank you, Phil. I'm Mira Swami. I'm the Drug Discovery Alliance Manager at Healx. Healx is a Cambridge-based biotech, so we've had a close relationship with Findacure for many years, and we share some of the same objectives. Healx is also very focused on working with the rare disease community to accelerate the development of treatments. And we're also focusing on repurposing, as we believe this is one way of accelerating treatment development. The other angle that we're interested in is using our artificial intelligence platform to speed up the identification of new drugs that can be used and repurposed in other rare indications. So we've been working with rare disease patient groups for about 5 or 6 years now and built up quite a community. And through this work that we do with rare disease patient groups, identified that a number of them could benefit from learning about some of these topics that can empower them to develop their drugs and take them forward to the clinic. So we ran a program last year called the Rare Treatment Accelerator, where we reached out to patient groups and invited them to apply to work with Healx on their rare disease. And as part of this engagement program, we surveyed them about some of the areas that they might find useful to learn more about, and natural history studies was one of the areas that they were keen to learn about, especially in the context of developing and testing drugs for clinical trials, which was a great motivator for us to run this webinar today, and we're really pleased to be doing it in collaboration with Findacure. So we hope you enjoy the lineup of speakers that we've got today. We're really excited to have this variety of speakers and having speakers from both the UK and the US representing the different views there. Thank you.
Thanks, Mira. I'm really excited to learn something today as well, so hopefully it'll be a really interesting webinar. So next up we have just a bit of housekeeping. If you haven't used Zoom webinar before, it's slightly different to Zoom meetings. And so if you do have questions, we'd appreciate if you put them in the Q&A box rather than in the chat. And the chat is for kind of technical difficulties, communicating with other people. And it's a lot easier for us to pinpoint questions if they're in the Q&A. And also, you can actually upvote questions. So if someone may ask the question that you think is really interesting and you want to see answered, then just click on the little thumbs up icon and you should be able to upvote that question so it comes to the top and so that we can see it. So the schedule for today is, firstly, we'll have Nasha, and she's going to be talking about natural history studies for rare diseases, followed by Kasim, who will be covering the Rudy study. And then finally, Neil will be talking us through Duchenne and natural history data. And he'll be taking kind of maybe a little bit of a different approach in that the study that I did wasn't solely natural history, but natural history elements came into it, and the way that they collected the data kind of lent itself to research and to treatment development. So hopefully it'll be something that we can all learn from as well. So the aims of today, some things that we want to cover are the importance of natural history studies to the rare disease community, best practices and how to overcome challenges when designing meaningful natural history studies, the implementation of novel technologies such as machine learning to enhance data collection in natural history studies, and examples of how the data from such studies can be applied to improve clinical trials and the pathway to therapeutic development. So I would love to just run a quick poll now. I know that we've got some people in the room from all over, so we're going to run a poll and kind of ask you where you're joining us from today, just so that we can kind of gather who's in the room. And that should be up on your screen now. Oh, interesting. A few from Australia, New Zealand. We've got about 10 people left to vote, if you haven't already. %28% from North America. Hopefully no one's up too early for this. Okay, I can see we've had 58% and we're going to close the polling now. But thank you so much for letting us know. That's really useful for us to refer back to in the future. And from now on, I'd like to pass over to Nasha, who is going to be giving her talk on natural history studies for rare diseases.
Thank you so much. Let me just get my presentation up. Okay, excellent. All right, so thank you everyone for joining. I'm really excited, and thank you Findacure and Healx for inviting me to give this, this talk, which I think is a really important one. So I'm going to focus today really on natural history studies and talk about it from two angles. One is that I run the Fox-UN Research Foundation. The reason for that is here on the screen. My daughter Amara was diagnosed with FOXG1 syndrome when she was born. And that is the reason I'm in this. And that's the passion behind my fight. And I'm also a director at Citizen, which is a natural history platform. So I'm going to be coming from different angles. And really my goal is to show you how we set it up, our Fox-UN Research Foundation. And you don't have to use the same vendors we do, but I think the thought process we went through was pretty good and has set us up for success. So I hope I can share that with all of you today. So when you think about, you have a rare disease, how do you, the first thing is, how do you understand your disease? Because for most of our diseases, nobody understands the disease, including us. So we have to figure out, number one, what is our disease about? And then how do we de-risk our disease so we are compelling for biopharma? There are 6,000, 7,000 rare diseases. How are you going to make your disease stand out so you're the one that gets picked in any given year? That's really important. So the way that we thought about it was, what are the assets we need to create? We need a contact database because biopharma cannot build a contact database. They cannot contact patients, but you can do that as an advocacy leader. You want to collect survey data, otherwise known as patient-reported outcomes, clinical data, a biobank. You want skin samples so you can turn those into fibroblasts and iPSC lines that are available for everyone to use, mouse or other animal models. And you're doing all of this, one, so these assets are available for researchers, but two is so you can find these clinical endpoints, so you can find biomarkers and do really good genotype-phenotype correlation. That is an advocacy group, I think, is one of our main roles. So as I go through the decisions we made, you again can choose different people to work with, but some of the things that I think are very important to keep in mind, and where I see advocacy groups sometimes failing and then regretting their choices later, really come down to these four areas. So one is, you have to own your data. And by own, it doesn't mean like hoarding it. It just means that you have access to your own data and you have flexibility with your data. Your data is connected. So if you have multiple data sets in different platforms, you have the ability as the advocacy group to actually connect those data sets. Your data is portable. So if you get sick of a platform or there is a better platform, you should be able to move your data to whatever the most exciting and innovative platform is. You don't need to be housed by any platform. And then your data has to be accessible, and it has to be accessible by everyone. There are so many natural history studies where patients themselves don't have access to the data. That is just unacceptable to me. The advocacy group has to have access. It needs to be easily accessible by biopharma. What is the point of accumulating all this data and then making it so difficult for the people that are going to be actually finding drugs for your disease to access the data? So you have to think about all these things before you sign contracts and decide who you work with. So number one, this is what we did, our FOXG1 Research Foundation. So number one is we had to figure out who are all our patients, where are they? So we basically started scouting through our Facebook pages. So there was a couple of Facebook support groups. We had a few parents, and this was not my idea, this was another parent in our group, started just going through all these pages, creating a simple Google sheet and writing down who are all the children that we know of. What type of mutation do we think they have based on what they've shared on Facebook? How severe are their mutations? Again, based on what they've shared on Facebook, where are they located? And it was Facebook, it was Instagram, it was emails, and we really compiled our own sort of database. That gave us a Rolodex of, all right, these are the patients that we need to contact to join our patient registry. But first we had to figure out who our patients even were. So that was the first step that we took. Now, if you're a new advocacy group in a new disease area and you don't even have a Facebook page, start one. And even if you hate Facebook, I personally do not like Facebook, but I'm on it because of FOXG1 research. It is where patients tend to go. You can build your community and you can start sharing information. The second step is to set up an actual patient registry. So when you create a Google sheet of information, that is not a patient registry because it is not controlled by an IRB. You can't really legally send data on patients to different researchers. Most researchers are not going to take your data that comes off a Google sheet. So you really need to set up a more appropriate patient registry. We decided to work with a vendor called Benufit. The reason was that it's just a tech vendor. We own everything. We can control this registry. That was important to us. Again, there's many platforms you can choose from. And as long as you keep in mind some of the things I talked about before, it doesn't matter what you use. We chose to use Benufit, and we really created our own patient registry. And here you can see this is a simple screenshot of the registry. We go through, you'll notice this is Amara's profile, my daughter. I've got her genetic information up. I was able to upload my genetic report. That's really important. You want patients to be able to upload genetic reports. You can put surveys on there. I would stick to validated surveys. That's a mistake we actually made. We created our own surveys. There's no point to do that because you won't be able to use them in a clinical trial. So you need to really look at FDA validated surveys and talk to people who understand that to choose the right surveys for your disease. And then we've linked to a natural history study, which I'll talk about. We took on a genetic counselor really early on into our foundation as a part of our founding team, who has really worked with us from the very beginning, Ellie Brimble, and she will go in and actually verify all mutations. So when we have parents upload a genetic report, she'll go through it and make sure that that patient actually does have a FOXG1 mutation. Sometimes we find patients who don't, or they have multiple mutations, and you want to sort all of that out so you have a really solid database of information. And again, we can share this in a de-identified form now with academic researchers and biopharma. So step 2 continued. You set up your patient registry. Now you actually have to get patients to actually join your registry. And the way we found to do this successfully was really run it like a business. And so we set up parent leads across the world. So we have country leads in large countries like the United States. We have regional leads, and we gave them the list of parents to contact. So they will start contacting those parents from our master list that I talked about. And you contact them again through Facebook, WhatsApp, email, whatever it takes to say, please join the patient registry. We conduct webinars. So I've hosted like 4 or 5 webinars now on why this is so important for our community. We send out messages. and then we give data back to our parents. I wish we were able to give more data back to our parents. And this year we are, that's one of our main goals, to give a lot more back. Here are two really easy visualizations that we created on our patient registry, where where is everyone located in the world and what is our mutation breakdown. Later in the year, we're going to get even more granular by mutation. How many kids have seizures? How many kids have dystonia? What medications are they taking? So our goal is really to help our parents make better day-to-day care decisions, and this enables us to do that. All right, so step 3, set up your platform for clinical reported outcomes. This gets called different things. It gets called a natural history study. It's very interconnected. What this means is it's data that is collected by doctors versus patients. And it's very important when you look at what biopharma looks at, what the FDA and other regulatory agencies look at, they don't tend to just take patient-reported outcomes. They really need the clinician-reported outcomes. The way natural history studies have been traditionally done are in person. So you have a few academic centers who are running sites, as they're called, and patients have to go to these sites. There's a lot of issues with this model. Patients have to fly to sites every 3 months, every 6 months. It's very expensive. So these studies tend to be very expensive. It's really difficult for most of us to take time off of work. If you have children who are severe, taking a child in a wheelchair with a feeding tube to a center is not that easy. And then the worst part is that because these are so expensive, most of them tend to be controlled by the sponsor. So whether in the United States, if it's the NIH, if it's a biotech company that's sponsoring it, if it's an academic, your data tends to get locked. And then once it's locked, you can't then connect it to all the other platforms that you may have set up with your registry and your biobank. So for me, this kind of a platform, this method of doing natural history studies, I don't think is very successful and is going to be the way that rare diseases will do these studies. So we chose the Citizen platform, and I literally joined the company so I could make sure our foundation could be on the platform. That's how passionate I was about that. So Citizen is a natural history platform. It's a patient-mediated platform. It was set up by someone named Anil Sethi, who set it up after his little sister died of metastatic breast cancer. And what I like about this platform, and things for you to keep in mind when you think about what platform you want to work with, is patients have to consent to join this platform. They own all their raw data. So all of their medical records are the patient's. Advocacy groups can literally access this de-identified information. Academics can access it. Biopharma can access it. And it can be connected through a unique identifier with our registry platform and other platforms that we have, and the data is portable. If we decide Citizen isn't the right platform for us anymore, we have the right to take our patient data and move it to another platform. So those are the reasons that I was really excited about, some of the reasons I was really excited about this platform. So you could see this is our landing page, and it really explains what is our natural history study, why is it important? And we call it a digital natural history study only because you don't have to go in person to be a part of this study. And that was a big deal for us. So the process is this is what we've done for FOXG1. We have 400 patients that are going to be joining this Citizen natural history study. Citizen will go in the United States and collect all the medical records from all our patients. And I mean all medical records, genetic test results, our neurology notes, all of that information. So when we think of a traditional natural history study, patients go into an academic center. The questions that you're asked, 99% of them are the same questions that we are already being asked every 3 months, every 6 months when we go for our checkups. So there's really no need to do an additional study. What we need to do is collect all the medical records, all of our neurology notes, and then parse through those notes to get the information that we need. And that's really what Citizen does. So the next step is doing systematic data extraction. So Citizen has spent the last 3 years building a machine learning system that goes through unstructured information, so notes, pulling out key elements that are important for a natural history, putting it in a data model. And so this is really kind of the platform. of and why we chose this platform. So here is just a snapshot of a patient account, and this is just a demo account. And you'll notice that all the medical records are collected and digitized. So in the United States, many parents may not know that hospitals only legally have to keep your medical records for 5 to 7 years. So as a first step, you need to get all your medical records and digitize them and put in one place. And so that is like one of the greatest advantages and has been a huge reason that our parents have been excited to sign on. Also, you could share. You'll notice there's a share button on top. So we can share these for second opinions really easily. Citizen also goes and collects all the imaging. So this is my daughter Amara's. These are all her MRIs. They're all collected. They're all digitized. It's connected to a PAC server, and I can share them. So now I don't have to go and get a CD and mail it to neurologists and other places for second or third opinions. I can just share it really easily. So this was very valuable for myself. And how, I talked about we're collecting all of these medical records with the goal that we're going to extract information that we can create a natural history study out of. So this is just an example. This is a typical neurology note, and this is what we would call unstructured data. It's not in a table format, so it's difficult to get data out. So our machine learning, and I'm just going to click through, you'll notice just in these paragraphs how many important elements we've been able to pull out. And you'll notice that there's a number next to all of these terms. So there's a couple things happening here. One is that the terms are condensed down to the correct term that it should be linked to. So if we look at the second paragraph, decreased tone throughout, that is supposed to be called generalized hyptonia, but doctors across the world will use different synonyms for generalized hyptonia. So the system will start to identify what are these different synonyms that all mean the same thing, generalized hyptonia. And then we'll connect to, you'll see the number on the right side, which is called a SNOMED code. SNOMED is a clinical terminology that is global. It's used across the world as a way to really define diseases. So we love SNOMED because it has, there's many, many advantages to SNOMED. One, that it can be used to normalize medical records across the world. And this is how we start coding our records and building this really great data set of clinical reported data. Now, something that I love about Citizen is that it shares the extraction back to patients. So this goes back to, one of the things that I talked about, one of the main philosophies is you will get more patients excited to join your platforms if you're sharing data back to them. And so any platform you join, you want to make sure you can do that. So this is a breast cancer example. You'll notice that the extracted on the left side, you've got your search filters. Those are all the entities that Citizen has pulled out. And on the right side, you'll see that those are the codes, and you can actually click on the document where that code is from. So what that basically means is that the patient themselves also has access to all this extracted data, and they can share that summary using the share function for second opinions. I can tell you my father was just diagnosed with tongue cancer, and I got him onto the Citizen platform. I got 6 second opinions in a matter of 2 weeks, and it completely changed the course of action we decided to take from him. And I couldn't have done it without this platform. So it's like truly life-changing. Now, for an academic researcher or for biopharma, we of course don't share that kind of view. That's a patient view. This is more of the way that it's going to look for an academic or biopharma. They will get normally a CSV file, and again, everything is coded. And different, the way it's looked at it is you want to basically take crude oil out of the earth and turn it into gasoline. You don't even need to do a lot of analysis. You just want to make the data clean and coded and available. So researchers can go and do things with that and publish on this and help to find a cure. So this is kind of the end result of what you want to end up with. All right, so that's everything on setting up your clinical data set, otherwise known as a natural history study. Although in my mind, a true natural history study includes patient data, clinical data, and your biobank. To me, that's a true natural disease history of a patient. So step 4, setting up your biobank. Now there's, again, many vendors that you could use, many platforms. We chose Coriell. Doesn't mean you have to choose Coriell. We chose it for a couple of reasons, which I'll go into. Again, You want to choose a platform where the samples are going to be made available for biopharma and academic researchers, and that they don't charge biopharma an exorbitant fee. You don't want to do anything that causes a biotech company to say, you know what, I'm going to focus on another disease because it's just easier to get those assets. You just don't want to create these barriers. So in this biobank, we collected skin and blood samples. Skin samples get turned into fibroblasts and iPSC lines. Blood samples get turned into LCL lines. I will be honest with you, we have not found a use for the LCL lines. All the researchers that we have worked with have preferred to get fibroblasts. So I wish early on I had just asked all our patients, all our parents to collect skin samples. But anyways, but you have to see what's important in your disease area. What's important here is that Coriell will ensure quality control. So this is really, really key. And when you think about your iPSC lines, so we used Coriell to collect our samples and to turn into fibroblasts. Then we had different academic researchers, scientists, take those fibroblasts and create iPSC lines. What is very, very, very important is that you get those scientists to redeposit the iPSC lines back into Coriell. And in your contracts that you stipulate, that is going to happen pre-publication. We have gotten into lots of issues with different scientists on this. It could take years to publish. In that time, you don't want to have this iPSC line that takes, a year to build and $20,000 to create stuck in someone's lab. You have to get it sent to a repository that you can then share with other scientists. So that's really important. And then Coriell will take any iPSC line that comes in and they do quality control on that line. So again, this is important because biotech companies will not really want to take iPSC lines unless they can ensure that there has been some quality control. That was a big reason we chose Coriell. We spoke to a few biotech partners. We asked them, where do you get your iPSC lines? And many of them said Coriell. So that was one of the big reasons. Also, it was free for us to create it. It's an institution that's funded by the US government. Because of that, it's a bit slower than if you worked with a private company. So you have to just weigh all of these risks and considerations. But again, focus on access. And last is you want to connect this to your patient data. So we have done a lot of work with Coriell to get unique identifiers that we can then connect to our patient registry that connects to our natural history study. So we have a beautiful line that connects all of our data into, if you can imagine, like a massive spreadsheet. And that is the end of my presentation. If you have questions, please again put it in the Q&A, or at the end, I think there's going to be an open Q&A.
Thank you, Nasha. We do actually have some questions that are quite specific to what you've been talking about. So I thought I'd just ask some of those questions now, if that's all right.
Sure.
So firstly, somebody asks, does Citizen collect info from the medical records of all patients with the condition, or just those who have signed up and given permission?
So the patient or the parent has to consent. They have to come on the platform and give permission that we can do this work.
Okay, thanks. And then just another one that has been kind of upvoted. Regarding the patient advocacy group collecting information from patients via social media, what are the privacy issues with this, especially when collecting variants and other medical information?
This is a great question. So this is something that I think parents and patients don't understand, that everything on Facebook is not secure. And we will get parents that will share everything on Facebook, but then are very hesitant to join a patient registry that is secure and controlled by an IRB. So again, we used Facebook just to figure out where are our patients and who are they. But you cannot use that data. It is not, you just cannot use it. You have to start a secure patient registry and collect that data with patient consent with an IRB, which is, an internal review board. There are some, they tend to be connected to an academic institution, or there's some kind of general ones. We use a general one called Pearl. There's also Western IRB. So you need to do that to really collect exactly as you mentioned for privacy rules.
Thank you. And then I can see other people asking questions, but we can leave some of those to the end. I just thought that I would ask about the difference between registries and natural history studies, just to kind of clarify right at the beginning before the next two talks, kind of how you would see the difference between the two of them.
Yeah, the definitions are so fuzzy, right? And so the way I think about it is a patient registry is really a contact database for your patients so you can contact them, which is critical. And two, it's a way to do patient-reported outcomes, so surveys. To me, a natural history platform is really looking at clinical data. Now, they're interchangeable. You could have a natural history platform that also collects patient-reported outcomes. So it's a bit interchangeable. What you want to think about in your head is that you need a contact database, you need patient-reported outcomes, and you need clinician-reported outcomes, and they need to be all connected.
Thanks, Nasha. I can see we do have some more questions for you, but I think we'll keep those till the Q&A at the end. Don't worry, guys, we'll answer your questions. But thank you so much, Nasha, for that overview of what you're doing with all of your data.
Thank you.
Next up, I would love to introduce Kasim, who's going to be talking to us about the Rudy study. So welcome, Kasim.
Thank you so much for your kind introduction. I'd like to thank Healx for inviting me to share my thoughts on this really important topic, and it really fits in with Nasha's great presentation. So hopefully you'll see some overlap and strengthening the points already made. So I'm a rheumatologist for adult patients, and I work in Oxford. And these are the topics I'll be covering. Before we do that, the team asked me to do a poll. So here are the poll questions. If you could just take 5 or 10 seconds to answer them. I won't answer them myself because that'd be a bit of a bias, really. But to figure out how to move the poll away from my screen. So the first one is if you've taken part in a research study, and if you have, do you know where your consent form is, and do you know the results of the study? So if you could answer that, that would be great. And I'll move on to the next slide, if that's all right. So why did I get involved in this sort of research? Well, we've got the poll answers. So 60% have taken part in previous research, really interesting. Only a third know where their consent form is. Oh, wow. And only 30% know the results of the study. That's really typical for what we find. And hopefully you'll see how the Rudy study is changing that. Thank you. Thank you, Philippa. Okay, so we asked people with rare diseases, why would you want to take part in a natural history study? Why would you give up your time? And they said their problem was when they see the doctor, they never have all of the information. And they were really worried about that because if the doctor doesn't have all the information, how can they make the right decision? They might get wrong tests, and they really wanted a record of their healthcare system. In the UK, it's quite hard to get hold of that because you go to different departments and different hospitals. So we made a concept that patients can access their own data, and that we would use validated questionnaires to measure the impact of their disease, and would help people record key events and diagnoses that they could keep as their own medical log. People like to join Rudy as participants because it's secure. You can see all your Healthline data on a timeline. You can monitor your health state, and as well as contributing to research and getting involved with research practice. Researchers like getting involved with study because it's really easy. They don't have to do anything really. The participants do it all because we rely on the participant entering all of the data. So patients enter all of their data, and it helps researchers can then see what patients have inputted and figure out what the progression is, if there's any complications they should flag, and maybe understand the differences between patients as well as recruit them to trials. Regulators need natural history studies because they have a very simple question. Usually the drug has been licensed, the new treatment has been licensed because it's safe and it works. But what regulators want to know is where does the treatment have the greatest benefit, and who should get the new treatment and who should not. And to answer that question, they need to know, what's the current impact of this rare disease, what care is currently delivered, and are there any special subgroups who should be prioritized for this new treatment? So we had a challenge. We were in the UK, population 66 million. There are over 7,000 rare diseases. And we were thinking, wow, in bone, there's 456 different disorders. Do we need 456 different databases? And we really weren't geared up for that. So as Nash has already mentioned, the traditional way is you go to a hospital for an appointment, and then you see a doctor who finds you and then consents you, and then you enter your data, it's entered onto a database, and it's ready for research. That doesn't really work with rare diseases because it's patients are all over the country. Some of them go to specialist centres, but a lot of adults don't. And it's how to find these adults, especially who aren't going to specialist centres, maybe lost to follow-up, so you get a really generalised picture of the impact of the disease in the community. So we set up RUDI, which stands for Rare and Undiagnosed Diseases Study, and it was really co-developed between patients and researchers to investigate rare diseases. And we didn't have much financing, so we made it all online because that's easy to do. So basically all the participants consent online, and I'll show you that, and then they enter their data for research, and they get an immediate benefit because all that data is available for them. Participants like it because it works online, so you can join anytime, complete questionnaires anytime, and get in touch anytime or anywhere. It's secure, so it meets all the university and UK standards for data security, and only very special people can see your personal data if they need to. People find it quite rewarding. We've got an active patient forum they can join, which helps them decide how it develops. And as I've already said, you can already see your own data and ask questions relevant to your condition. So when I say you can see your own data, there's different ways of doing that. So we've taken a timeline approach. So everyone has a secure website, and on their timeline page, they've got all of their events they've listed. So here, visiting Cambridge, went to the hospital there, and they had some treatment and some physiotherapy. And it might be you want all of your data, or you might want some of it. We give you the option to load up all your items so you can print it out, and people are taking these to consultations with health and social care workers to help describe what their patient journey has been. The other thing is contribution to research. The 30% of people who didn't know what the outcome of the research was can't really happen in RUDI. Every time a paper is published, the researcher is required to put a small summary of the paper on their website, and on our main website, we're encouraging our researchers to do short video casts of what they're trying to show with their research. So who are we? So there's me on the left. I'm sort of leading this as a doctor. Alistair Kent, who's a great guy, who really pushed forward the agenda for rare disease in the UK. He's our chair of External Advice Committee. Jane Kay's our lawyer who helped with the ethics. Joe is a senior programmer. Nathaniel's junior programmer, well, junior, he's the main programmer. Anne's our patient representative, and Alison runs the whole thing as the study director. So we were set up in 2013 with a call from the government to say who will set up rare disease networks. We got it in October 2013 with my mentor, Paul Wordsworth. Within 6 months, we launched the website, had our first external advisory committee, and in 2018, we went from just skeletal diseases to all rare diseases. Nash has already mentioned the importance of IRB or ethics, so it's really important you get this. We can recruit patients anywhere in the UK. They check the forms and questionnaires are right. They approve our linkage to NHS data, and allows the data, as Nash has said, to be shared with researchers, both academic and industry. So that's the website. It's live. You can visit it. If you have got a rare disease and live in the UK, you can join the study. If you don't, that doesn't apply. If you just add RUDI test to the last line of the address page, you can see our test website. There's a nice video on Find Out More, which describes the study and the primary and secondary objectives. And one of our patients has made a video of the study as well, giving a wider perspective. So when people sign up, we've made it really easy. So everything's online, all the information leaflets. You click on, you've got a rare disease, enter your data. We link to something called Orphanet, which is not as big as SNOMED CT, but it's got a lot of rare disease names. You type it in here. If you mistype it or you're not quite sure, you can add it as text, or you can add syndrome without a name. We have an online consent process, so if you understand the needs of the study and you have no more questions, you're shown this sort of tick box. It's dynamic, which is quite cool because it means that you can change your mind. So you click what you want to agree to in terms of sharing events, how your healthcare records are shared, how your samples are shared, and it goes on and on. It's quite detailed how you want to be contacted by SMS or text, email or telephone or by letter. What happens if you pass away? How do you want your samples used? And because it's dynamic, you can change your mind later. And people have found this really reassuring. It's not a stressful thing. They know whatever they tick, they can go back to and then change their mind later. Once they're registered, they get their own private portal. And this is the test site, as I mentioned. So it's about me and about my rare disease. And we just have a ton of usual questionnaires. They can be disease focused. So if you've told Rudy you've got myeloma, or you have a myeloma questionnaire, and we're developing a bigger bank per rare disease for this. Then questions everyone wants to ask about activities of daily living, quality of life, tiredness, pain, sleep, and mental well-being. And we have a few questionnaires if you're a child as well. An animator, Joe, designed this. So this is the questionnaire. It's pain to text, so you can enter your pain. It works off a tablet, a phone, or a computer. People quite like it, made it as easy to use as possible. And on the profile page is all the information about you. So it's your profile, your diagnostic history, we've just added ethnicity, your consent settings, which doctors are looking after you, and the other studies that you work with. So we've been running for a few years. We're now almost up to 3,000 consented participants, and we've got over 40,000 questionnaires completed. As you can see, we had a big spike from 2019 onwards, and we had all rare diseases. It tapered off a little bit during COVID, but it looks like it's increasing again. We have really lots and lots of rare diseases, but we've got a big push. We've been funded to do a lot of work in a rare bone cancer called myeloma. We work with Myeloma UK a lot with this. We work with the Brittle Bone Society, FDSS UK and XLH UK for these disorders, as well as Vasculitis UK. And you can see the numbers that we've recruited. So the team asked me how has it changed? So there's a rare disease called fibrous dysplasia. It affects the bone, skin, and hormone-producing organs. And we teamed up with a team in NIH who used some of our questionnaires in their patient registry. And basically what we found was that pain is a big problem, and that we'd probably been missing a group of people who you can see in red, who have what we call nerve pain rather than usual pain. And this is really important because this requires different drugs. You don't give them codeine, you have to give them drugs more related to gabapentin or duloxetine or those sort of drugs. And you can see here the proportion with this sort of nerve pain was very high in those with a lot of pain. And this has had a direct impact. So we published the best practice guideline for this in International Consortium, and part of it is now to ask about abnormal pain and sleep. So Rudy has affected patient care today, but also we're thinking of clinical trials where we recruit people with or without this nerve pain, look for new treatments and new studies. We've done other publications. We've looked at health economic impact of rare diseases, so we know the quality of life now and how it varies and how we can improve it. We've looked at how we can improve the diagnosis using a more complicated histology techniques in a rare disease called osteogenesis imperfecta. So the team asked me who can access the data, and Nash is quite right. The patient owns the data because it's on their dynamic consent form. So they can say, I don't want anyone to look at my data, and that's fine. We do have a transparent published governance, so and that regulates who can access the data and how it's used, but it's really driven by participants on their dynamic consent page. We work with an ever-growing group of patient groups. I'm really grateful for them. Without them, we wouldn't have got there. And the patient forum is fantastic. We meet every 2 or 3 months by GoToMeeting for about an hour or so, and they really do change what we do. They add different parts of the study, different topics to investigate, and also how we communicate with our community. Because we're online, you don't have to go to a study site to be recruited. So we can we've been approached by a number of studies to help with recruitment, because we know who's in our group. We know what sort of rare disease they have or what treatments they've had. So we can really easily identify people who would be eligible. And if on their dynamic consent page, they're happy to be contacted, and most are, then we can send them the information sheet and they can be recruited. So a lot of studies are now using recruitment through Rudy as an option. Even though we've left the EU with the horrible Brexit, we're still working very hard with our European colleagues, and Natasha Appelman has been fantastic in Leiden, setting up this Your Bone consortium, which is looking at bone disorders, and I'm leading a work package in patient outcomes, which will hopefully bring a lot of the Rudy intelligence into the platform and then make it available across Europe. Translation is important, so we through not through design but through collaborations with Jane Kay and a great professor called Kazuto Sensei at Osaka University, we've actually set up Rudy in Japan, which involved a lot of translation, and it works really well. And then more recently, we've worked with Kartik Ramasamy, who's a kid bone cancer. I've mentioned myeloma quite a few times already. He's got a lot of funding to do this now. It just shows you the flex of Rudy. So Rudy was initially set up to just measure the 6-monthly quality of life questionnaires. So participants get texted or emailed, depending how they want to be contacted every 6 months, say, hey guys, time to fill in another questionnaire, or update your profile, or update your events. We've overshot our recruitment, and that was all going really well. And then we had this terrible COVID pandemic, and it's been really horrible. A lot of rare bone disease people are really scared by it, and we've now got vaccines. And really, there's very little data on how rare diseases affect vaccine in terms of side effects, but more importantly, does it actually work? So we were able, within a couple of weeks, with working through with Dr. Ramasamy's team, to set up a study within Rudy. And now we have over 70 people who've given their blood before they're vaccinated, and we'll be able to measure it after they're vaccinated and be able to tell them using lab tests whether their COVID vaccine is working. And it's just an example of, once you've set up these natural history studies, it does open doors, and because the people are already in and they're already motivated to research, it really is a fantastic opportunity. So the team asked me to summarize the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So I think the strength is regular data collection. You can recruit people who are less severely affected. It's got very low doctor dependency. And, you know, I don't know what doctors are like in other countries, but our medics are great, but they're really busy, and actually getting them to record the same information every time on every consult with every member of their team is a real challenge. And we have got very clear governance. Opportunities, I've already shown you how it's scalable, both geographically across diseases, but also by increasing patient engagement. And lots of patients have got a lot out of joining the forum. It does require authentication. People are signing up online. We don't really know who they are until we actually get their hospital records and can check it. We may do that in a subset. It really doesn't help people who don't have access to the internet. We do have paper versions, and about 10 patients are receiving 6 monthly paper questionnaires, but they don't really get the value of having the online platform and the timeline. And we don't currently have a doctor form because we haven't really needed one, because we haven't been able to, we're not sure the doctors will be able to consistently fill it in across all the centres. Our biggest threat was Brexit and information governance. We think we got around that by working with the Your Bone project and putting Rudy into Europe. So that was about it. They wanted me to keep it quite short. I really want to thank everyone who's taken their time to help us. Rudy is really a collaborative approach. I've got a fantastic team in Oxford. I've got an amazing patient forum, and all the participants in the study who've given up their time to give their data to help us improve their care. They constantly stretch us, give us queries, and, you know, we don't always get it right, but we're here first time, but we are here to get it right in the long term. So happy to stop there and take any questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kasim. A brilliant introduction to that. We do have a few questions that are specific to your talk. So firstly, somebody asks, how do you manage disease-specific quality of life measures across so many rare diseases? Do you add them in as each new disease gets added? And they add that last time they looked, Rudy was just for rare bone diseases. So I think that's why they're asking.
Yeah, so Rudy, that was in, I think, 2018, we went to all diseases. It's a really good question about disease-specific quality of life measures. They are really good, because what they do is they pick out things that are specific for that disease. So maybe hearing's a problem, or maybe sleep is a problem, or dental health is a problem. The issue we found is that in the UK, we have a NHS that's regulated, and we have to give, we have to prioritize our healthcare spend to those with greatest need. And actually the regulators are all using what we call general quality of life measures like EQ5D or Euroqual or something called SF86. So actually, I really like disease-specific quality of life measures. In fact, for myeloma, we've actually put in, I think, 2 or 3 disease quality of life measures for myeloma. But at the end of the day, it's really around the generic ones that our regulators are wanting. And I suppose it comes down to what Nash said, is what's the question you want to answer? Do you want to phenotype people and say, look, who's got more bone disease, who's got more hearing problems, who's got more lung disease? Or do you want to do something that regulators want? And I suppose what you have to get that clear. We've taken the middle line. We've gone a little bit of this and a little bit of that.
Thanks, Kasim. We do have some other questions that are kind of focusing on accessibility, but I think we'll leave those till the end so that all the speakers can kind of have their say
Sure.
on the separate platforms. But I'm just going to ask one more question. So who has access to aggregated data from Rudy? Could pharma, academic researchers or patient groups have access if that has been consented?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the beauty of Rudy. So if you as a patient do not want pharma to look at your data, you just put a cross. If you do want pharma to look at your data, then you put a tick. What tends to happen, they have to be ethically approved. That's the first thing. And then we usually ask them to go through an academic organization. And then they partner up with an academia. So we're working with, I've already shown you the work we've done with NIH. We're working with a really great researcher, Alex Ireland in Manchester. We work with Meena Balasubramaniam in Sheffield. We're really open. I would love patient groups to do this. In fact, we had a really great session where we just got the patient forum, invited them down to Oxford before COVID, obviously, and just showed them all our data. And they came up with a research question. And so this will be the first patient-initiated research question that's been answered through Rudy. COVID's put a pause on it, but yeah, we would love patient groups to get in touch. We're more than happy to work with them on the analysis and getting it done. And all of our data is online. So there's a data dictionary online, and you can just see what data we've collected. And you can ask us, how many people do you have with whatever syndrome or disease you're interested in. We don't have every disease in everyone in the country, but quite a few of the diseases have got more than 20 people, which is usually enough to write a nice description of.
Thanks, Kasim. And then we'll keep those questions till the end, but I just thought I'd add, you can actually go on the Q&A by yourself and have a look and answer some of the questions through if you fancy.
What I'll do, I'll put on the, I'll put the link to the test site somewhere. Where's the best place to put that?
Yeah, so if you just put that in the chat, that'll be great, and then people can go and have a look.
Sure.
Thanks, Kasim.
No, not at all.
I'd love to now introduce Neil Bennett from Action Duchenne, who's going to be talking about collecting natural history data for Duchenne.
Cool, thank you. And thanks for asking us to take part today. So, as it was mentioned earlier, my talk's going to be, I think, slightly different. I'm going to look at kind of the potential of natural history, as well as how we collect some of it. And I'll talk about why it's only some of it as I go through. But I thought it's probably important to start off with, if my slides will work. Excellent. It's probably important to start off with the big question at the start, which, why bother collecting natural history data? And I came up with 5 reasons when I was thinking this. I'm sure there's others, and I'm carefully not going to say that these are in the order of importance, because I think, different people have different ideas about what natural history is for, how it can be used. So these are the kind of reasons we think that natural history is important. For rare conditions, especially, helping patients to understand their condition is really... Thanks, Tony. Let's see if it works this time. Is that working?
Yeah, that's working. Sorry, Neil, I didn't realize you were onto the slide part yet.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. Okay, so there's lots and lots of different reasons to collect natural history data. But for rare diseases, especially, trying to help patients understand the condition and the prognosis of it, and clinicians to support their patients and educate them is, that's got to be up there with the most important. Obviously, helping researchers to understand the condition, finding research questions, and supporting clinical trials. They're probably the classic ones. What we're seeing in Duchenne at the moment is a move to natural history data actually being part of a clinical trial. So we're starting to see trials move away from big placebo groups to a situation where actually a placebo group might be formed of a small placebo group and a big natural history study. So natural history is clearly important. But I thought I would start this with a test. And so I'm going to try and use the chat function just to do a really quick, try and do a show and tell. So it might work, it might not, but we'll have a go. So I said natural history is important for explaining a condition. So here's two conditions. They're obviously not rare. They're conditions that hopefully everybody will have heard of. And if I go on to the next slide and put some of the symptoms of these conditions up, I've helpfully given you the first letter. Anyone who's got any ideas what those gaps might be, if you want to type them in the chat, what I'm hoping is that at least some of you might know some of the answers. Okay, and straight away they're coming through. So someone's got the first one as being rash. Yeah, lots of people know rash. Fatigue, excellent. Fever. Okay, so I think between you all, you've got pretty much most of the answers. So even some of the slightly more outlandish ones. So chickenpox, everybody knows there's a rash. Lots of people get a fever. Some people get headaches, tiredness. If you get shingles, the rash again, pain, sensitivity, lots and lots of symptoms associated with a common condition. The reason everyone can answer that question in the chat is because everyone knows about the natural history of chickenpox. It's a really well-known disease, and the natural history is really well-known as well. You get a rash. It also highlights some of the limitations of natural history data. Most people probably know that you get shingles because you've had chickenpox. I think the boring technical explanation is that it's a reactivation of a virus that maintains latency for life. And so most people know that, again, because of natural history data. If I was to ask what causes the shingles, I'm guessing lots of people would probably put question marks in the chat, and that's because it's not known. And that's not something natural history can help with. You know, natural history can prove that chickenpox, once you've had chickenpox, you can get shingles. It can't prove the why unless you're collecting really detailed data at the level that's probably impractical. So there are limitations to natural history data. So I'm going to be talking about Duchenne and natural history data. For those who don't know, Duchenne muscular dystrophy is a muscle wasting condition. It's an X-linked genetic condition, which means it mainly affects males. Some females are affected, but the vast majority are male. Females can be carriers, so it's an X-linked condition. And the condition causes progressive wasting of muscle. That includes skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle. And the way charities like Action Duchenne and others typically describe the kind of course of the condition is that on average, people are diagnosed at around 4 years old. Typically, they require a wheelchair in their teens, and eventually they'll need a ventilator as the breathing muscles are affected. We know that life expectancy is reduced, but over the last 10, maybe 15 years, it's increased significantly, really quite significantly. And at the moment, there's no cures, but various treatments are available in various parts of the world. And there's more potential treatments in clinical trial. You'll notice that lots of the language on that slide is quite vague. And that's done on purpose because the language on this slide is something that is absolutely right. And it's always important to get the things right. But again, this goes to show the limitations of natural history, even in a condition when it's really kind of well studied with really good data collection. So that's the kind of very kind of overviewy stuff about Duchenne. If we think about the kind of data collection about Duchenne, it actually, well, first of all, it's a relatively common rare disease. So in the UK, there's about 2,500 people living with the condition. And it was first described almost 200 years ago. First case report 150 odd years ago. It's caused by mutations in a single gene. That gene was sequenced in the 80s. And even before the kind of genetic testing was available, there were reasonably good diagnostic tests for Duchenne. And so all this adds up to a condition where you're thinking, yeah, okay, you can collect some good data here. There's something to go after. It's not you know, it's a very complex condition in terms of prognosis at the individual level, but actually on paper, at least, it sounds like something that's relatively simple. You've got one gene affected, well-known conditions, you've got good animal models, or at least decent animal models in all sorts of animals. And importantly for this talk, there's really, really good data collection systems in Duchenne. So this is going to focus mainly on the UK, just because that's what I know about. I'll mention some other countries and what they're doing. But in the UK, we've been collecting data, I say we, I mean Action Duchenne and many others, probably for close to 20 years now. So there's a North Star database, which is a clinical audit database that was originally formed as. It's a database of a network of clinicians from across the 22 leading centres in the UK. And they put all their clinical data into that database. So you can imagine that's a really, really rich resource of clinical data. There's a newly formed or newly forming adult North Star database. There's various imaging studies collecting data that collect things like MRI scans. Action Duchenne curates the patient registry, and we focus on collecting patient-reported outcomes as well as genetic results. There's a system called Hercules. They do disease modeling, looking at reimbursement. There's biobanks in the individual clinics, in groups of clinics, nationally. If you look at the national biobank webpage, you can kind of filter by condition codes and work out that there's precisely one person living with Duchenne in their database. There's lots of research databases. People working on outcome measures have their own databases. And nowadays there's lots and lots of patient wearable data. And so you can see that there's this really, really rich set of data in Duchenne. And I just thought I'd illustrate something. So this is a graph from something that was published probably 18 months ago now, but it's a graph taken from the North Star Network's publication. Happy to circulate the link afterwards, but it's just one graph that shows the natural history of Duchenne. And so on this graph, every line represents one patient. They followed some patients for close on 10 years, I think. And up the y-axis, you've got NSAA, which is the North Star assessment. So that's just the measurement tool they're using. And actually, it's a collection of 17 functional skills that you score. And so this just goes to show the kind of data that's being collected in Duchenne, how long it's being collected, and the kind of modeling people are able to do now. And so if I go back to this, you'd hope with all that wonderful things I've just said, so, you know, it's a condition where it's feasible to collect lots of data, there's lots of data being collected. You'd hope that I could move away from this kind of very, very vague language to something a little bit more, well, numerical, should we say. And actually, if I add numbers, what you end up with, you'll see the exact reason why I was so vague before. So, you know, we know that diagnosis actually happens probably between the ages of 2 and 7. There's some people diagnosed younger, some older, but the majority are in that range. Wheelchairs are required somewhere between 9 and 19. Again, there's people both below and above that age range. Ventilator usage, probably around 14. Life expectancy, you can tell how certain I am about this number by the number of question marks I've put after it, but various people use the number 30, but there's very little evidence to support that, even with all this data collection going on. And so it's really important just to always bear in mind that natural history studies are fantastically important. You can learn an awful lot, but there are limits. Just going back to this graph, I like this graph a lot. I use it in a lot of my talks because it actually shows so many things. So if you're a pharmaceutical company interested in doing a trial in Duchenne, and you've got a clinical trial that you need to use a functional outcome measure, this information can tell you straight away the age of people you need to be looking for. So if you need people with a certain assessment score, you can almost just pick it off the graph and choose your age for your trial. If you've got a treatment that you hope will help older people or younger people, again, this tells you what kind of outcomes you should be looking for in that trial. If you're a clinician, it tells you a little bit about what you might expect for your patients. But probably the most important thing is showing this graph to families. And we do that quite a lot. It's obviously a massively complex graph. But the real message on this graph, I mean, some of the researchers who present this, you'll hear them talking about it as a spaghetti plot. It goes really, really well to show the complexity of the condition and, importantly, the variability of the condition. And that's one of the big messages we try and kind of tell families about, that no two people living with Duchenne have the same experience. The condition's incredibly variable. And having natural history data can be really, really helpful when you're having those conversations with families. So I mentioned that Action Duchenne, we curate the UK DMD registry. I thought I'd talk a little bit about the registry. As Philippa mentioned earlier, we had a kind of interesting chat last week about whether the registry is natural history or not. And I think I've reached a cunning middle ground. So what I'm going to say is that the registry is definitely not a longitudinal natural history study. So what the registry is a snapshot database, and it tries to encompass the spectrum of people living in the UK with a condition at any one point in time. So it's not a study over time, but we're trying to create a kind of snapshot that moves along with time. And the next 2 points are really important, because if you're looking to set something like this up, or you've got something set up, knowing what you're trying to do informs an awful lot about what you will do. So our aims with the registry are to try and bring clinical trials to the UK, and occasionally we'll assist in recruitment for trials at a reasonably non-complex level. And so typically we answer queries from farmers about the feasibility of a study. So they might want to know the percentage of people in the UK with a certain type of mutation, or the number of people in the UK living with Duchenne taking steroids, those kinds of really top level, kind of easy to answer questions. If we're recruiting for a trial, we can do things like send out invitations to talk to the study teams and things like that. And so we focus on collecting data that's complementary to others. So, you know, I showed you the North Star data, the spaghetti plot. We collect different data to that system. There's no point, if you're building a system, in collecting data that's collected elsewhere if you can get at that data that's collected elsewhere. So it says at the bottom, the registry is currently a standalone system. So are the other systems in the UK. But there's kind of talk underway at the moment to work out how we can link these data sets. As an example, we take our genetic data direct from genetics labs. It's inputted by the geneticist. The clinical data, the clinician actually enters the genetic results. So the idea is our genetics data might be better than the clinics, just because we've got it straight from the geneticist. There's no interpretation or data, kind of secondary data input by a clinician. And so most of what we collect, it's complementary in that it sits nicely next to other systems in the UK. It's also complementary in the other sense of the word. So we work closely with registries around the world, and there's something called, in Duchenne at least, the Treat-NMD network, which tries to define a data set across all registries to ensure that actually what we're collecting here is complementary to the US, that you can line the data up. And so for us, that means we mainly focus on patient-reported outcomes. I've put questions patients and families can answer. We don't think that patients should necessarily be having to type in results of medical tests, because you can very easily get kind of the wrong information accidentally, and it can quickly degrade your data quality. So we think it's fine to ask a patient, for example, you know, in Duchenne, people take steroids. So, you know, it's fine to say to a patient or a carer, are they taking steroids? We'd be more wary of saying to a patient or a carer, you know, how many times do they take steroids each month? What's the dose? All those kinds of more detailed questions, especially because we know that's collected in the medical notes. So this just, I keep going back to this graph, but it's really important. It just goes to show that the amount of data you can end up collecting looks very, very scary on paper, but actually it's not. You know, even something like this, it would be horrible to try and collect it in an Excel spreadsheet. but it's systems of that kind of complexity if you're just interested in collecting data. The problem, of course, comes that actually collecting data just for the sake of collecting data is relatively silly. As some of the other speakers have said, it's getting it out is the important thing. So using Excel to collect data sets like this is not good. So I was asked to kind of mention in my talk things to consider if others are thinking about natural history. And so I've helpfully called this what to do. And there's a really simple answer for this. So if you're thinking about developing natural history systems, collecting natural history system or data, what should you do? The answer is it depends. And I know that's incredibly unhelpful, but actually it's absolutely true. So things to consider to kind of get to your it depends answer. Find out who's collecting what and how. There may well be small groups of clinicians somewhere in the world, somewhere in your country collecting data. It might be a small group of clinicians collecting it in an Excel spreadsheet. That's happened in Duchenne in certain countries. So try and find out if anybody's collecting the data, and if they are, how they're collecting it, and whether you can get at it, or whether you can link your data to it if you collect more data, all those kinds of questions. There's no, I think probably the talks this afternoon have demonstrated this, there's no one size fits all for natural history data collection. You know, the US rules and electronic health records over there make it relatively easy to collect medical records. In the UK, there's absolutely no standardized record keeping system. Some hospitals, some of the big hospitals now have electronic health records. If they're there, you can generally get at them, but often you're having to reach out to individual clinicians, which means it's a horribly inefficient process. Important thing there, though, being able to link your data set to somebody else's in some ways can equal data collection, as long as you can kind of get at it and use the other data. And that's something we're kind of talking about in Duchenne at the moment, where we're all collecting really good quality data. It's really important to be able to link that data together. Try and design what you're going to collect with others. For us, we talk to Treat NMD, that's the alliance we're in, but we talk to other registries all the time as well. So don't try and build a silo, try and build something that works well with other people. Somebody's already mentioned the challenges of getting clinicians to collect your data. Certainly in the UK, clinicians are incredibly busy, and things like data collection or adding data to a system is often just done in addition to your day job. So certainly our genetics data, that's something that the geneticists do for us or do for the registry in addition to their day job. So it's not actually part of the job, but they do it. We used to actually have clinicians enter data. Now we've moved to a patient reporting model for mainly that reason. The challenge of, you know, clinician time, it's really scarce. Again, there's challenges around collecting data if somebody's in a clinical trial. Some companies get incredibly nervous if a system has data on their kind of participants. There's ways around those problems, but you know, the key thing is to probably engage with the clinics, engage with the trial sponsors and talk about it. And probably the most important one is the last point here. So if you're going to build any kind of data collection system, have a plan for how you're going to engage with that person. That's something that we've found a real challenge over the last few years. It's summarized, I guess, by what can you give back. So it's really important to offer information, data back to participants. We work closely with the US registry, and their kind of head of the registry over there said, he likes to say, if you build a registry, will they come? And the answer is yes. And then he said, and if you build a registry, will they come back? And the answer is yes, sometimes. And if you build it and keep it going, will they keep coming back? And every time you ask that extra question, you need to engage people more to make or to encourage them to keep coming back. So engagement is really important. And then my last slide, I was asked to touch on real world data. Collecting data in the real world can, especially in conditions like Duchenne, it can actually combat some of the limitations in other collection methods. So Duchenne's a muscle disease. And you can imagine if someone goes to a clinic appointment and they're a bit tired, they might not do very well in those tests. Duchenne also causes issues with fatigue, so you know it can have a knock-on effect. So collecting data in the real world effectively allows you to average out the days when people are tired or they're not tired. And so that there are definitely uses for real world data. It's worth saying that I guess there's a difference between collecting real world data and collecting data in the real world in real time. So, imagine people have got wearables. It's one thing to kind of get that data. It's another thing entirely to be collecting that as it's happening. If you try and do that, it's almost certain to need some kind of AI type system, or at least some help. And then just my very last point, don't think that natural history only kind of applies to health data. So certainly in the UK, I've been in a talk from the Cystic Fibrosis Trust where they've been talking about collecting air quality data. Things like online shopping, you can access that data and make implications about people's diets. There's lots and lots of data out there that probably all is applicable. It's just how much effort you're kind of willing to put in to working out what it actually means. Because, one of the challenges of this kind of big data stuff is you collect lots and lots of data, but it's difficult sometimes to know exactly what you're seeing. And so with that, I will finish my talk and hand back to Philippa.
Thank you so much, Neil. I think you got a good in-between ground there, and that was really helpful. So I'm going to go straight on to the questions now, because we've been getting a lot of questions, which is great, and a lot of engagement. I'm just going to go from the top down and start with one for Kasim. And somebody asks, is Rudy available in other languages?
Yeah, it can be. At the moment, it will require an investigator in the country to say they want to use Rudy, and then we'll work with them to develop it in their country. The key thing is to have a good investigator, excellent patient group, and the motivation to stick it out for the long term.
Thanks, Kasim. And then I believe this question is Nasha, and she asks, can I ask how you funded this project, and do you charge pharma for access?
That's a great question. So our patient registry, we funded ourselves from our fundraising activities, and same for Citizen. With Citizen, there is the way the platform works is that biopharma does pay a license fee, and a part of that revenue gets sent back to the advocacy group. So it also helps us with our internal fundraising.
Thank you, Nasha. And then I'm just going to kind of ask Anil the same question. So how do you keep funding going so that you can keep digitally updating the registry?
Okay, so we're funding it through various kind of streams, I guess is the right answer. So the registry specifically, we do get money. So it's kind of complex because of the alliances we're in, but the Treat and MD Alliance, which is the International Global Alliance, if we respond to a query for them, they effectively build a pharma and they distribute that funding across their alliance members. So we get some funding from that. If we deal directly with farmers, we can talk to them about funding. It depends what they're asking for, how much work it is for us, that kind of thing. So we don't have a price list on the website, I guess is the way to explain it, but we do talk to them and we do charge for certain things. In terms of upgrading, that's a big job. So at the moment we've been focusing on ways to kind of update the data, if that makes sense. At the moment there's a big piece of work happening with Treat and MD who are looking at a whole new data set. So with that new data set will come some kind of requirement for us to update the platform as well. So that's something we're kind of looking at for the future, and we'll be guided a little bit by the data set we need to collect, because obviously it's difficult to spec something out without knowing exactly how you're going to be doing it. So it's a constant process, but yeah.
Thanks, Neil. And then a question for Kasim. When will the Rudy study be available outside of the UK?
Well, it'll be available in the EU countries in a few years' time. It will be a version of Rudy that will be merged into the Biobank system. We're just working that out now. It's already in Japan, and like I said, it's really we built it for a very specific rare disease, but by building it, we actually realized other people can use it. So we're open for people to get in touch with us I don't actually deal with that. That's dealt by the university.
Mhm.
They can get in touch and they can work on what they need.
Okay, thank you. And then just something for all of our speakers regarding accessibility. So how accessible are your different sites, for example, for the visually impaired, and can they be used using screen readers?
Yeah, so work with the university, actually, that's a legal requirement. So our IT team, yeah, you can go onto Rudy because we work for a university, all of our outputs that are patient-facing have to be accessible. So if you want to try it, I don't know who asked that, do have a go and give us feedback. We haven't had much feedback, but our team have worked really hard to make it accessible to people with visual, and it does work with screen readers.
Great. And Nasha, I didn't know, and Neil, don't know if you wanted to answer that as well.
It's a great question. Sorry, Neil. We actually have just started looking into making our site accessible for folks with disabilities. So that's a project we're just starting, and Kasim, I may tap you for advice.
It takes a while. You need very good, it's very, very detailed because everything has to be looked at.
Isn't everything?
Well, no, because it has to, you should be able to access the website by pressing tab.
Right.
And things like that. And tab ordering a website is quite difficult, but it's worth, I mean, we're here for our patients. If that's what they need,
Right.
that's what they need.
Absolutely.
Neil, I don't know if you wanted to answer.
Yeah, I was just going to agree absolutely with Nasha. It's something we're aware of, something we're looking at the minute, because we're using what is a reasonably basic kind of web interface platform. We rely a lot on basically what's built into browsers and stuff, which isn't perfect. But because it's nice and simple, it means it's not quite such a tricky thing as having lots of interactive things popping up and stuff. So yes, building something fully accessibly for everybody is a challenge. Yeah.
Yeah.
But there are good guidelines. There are really good guidelines on accessibility requirements. And I would just say go there and then find someone who's done it. You can always link in with us. But it's just following the guidelines. And
then another question regarding the Rudy study. Do you think in the UK using a platform like Rudy, where the patient enters the data, is better than a platform that will rely on collecting NHS medical records?
Yes.
Do you have a reason?
Yeah, it's very simple. I don't know why people distrust patient-entered data. I've actually worked in the NHS, and how many times have you seen a junior doctor who confuses the left side with the right side, or puts the wrong decade on for a procedure? Patients are really passionate about their data. They want to get it right. And Alison, I put her email in, I probably shouldn't have done that, but Alison spends a lot of her time telling people it's okay if you don't remember the exact date. And because people know this is their data, they are really protective and they make sure it's really accurate. And getting data out of the NHS, where some of them are digital, some of them are paper-based, different departments, different healthcare servers, some are using Cerner, some are using Epic. It is a nightmare. And then you've got primary care databases. It's very hard to do. So I always listen to the patient first. It usually keeps me out of trouble.
Thanks, Cassie. An interesting question for Neil. Are Action Duchenne looking into any at-home digital real evidence platforms?
So not specifically is probably what we're, I guess you kind of guessed through my talk. What we're focusing on at the minute is a way to, we're trying to work with all the other partners, all the other charities and things across the UK to build a system that lets all this data be joined together. So that's our priority at the moment. I think the at-home stuff, there's a couple of research groups in the UK who are investigating, what, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to do product placement on a webinar, but whether you can use certain wearable devices, should we say, to pull out useful data. So there's people looking at that, and hopefully if they work out something useful, they're already collecting data. All we need to do is, it's kind of what I said in my talk, if you can link to someone else collecting the data and get them to collect more data from more people, then you're kind of collecting it by proxy almost. So I think if you can link to other systems, then you don't need to do it yourself. If that doesn't work out, certainly for Duchenne, it's something that might well be very important down the line. Collecting real world data in real time it's challenging. I suspect what you might see is one of the big tech companies come in with, you're seeing big tech companies building these platforms. I suspect what might happen is that kind of data might be made available at that, or I hope might be made available at that kind of level, because you don't want to be doubling up on collections. So if someone's collecting it in a system somewhere, just try and get access to the system rather than build something yourself from scratch. But yeah, linkage is a good thing.
Thanks, Neil. And then another question about Rudy. So if a patient organisation in the US is involved in a natural history study but doesn't have access to UK patients, is it possible, if patients are part of Rudy, that Rudy can share data or connect with this international study?
Yeah, it's on the dynamic consent page, whether you want your data approved, looked at by international researchers. If the participants have agreed to that, they just need to complete an analysis plan form, which is on the website, and submit it to our data access committee. They will need some sort of IRB approval in their own country. But the patients have explicitly consented to international research. That's ticked. Yeah, they can do that.
And then another question for you, Kasim. How do you ensure that your questions in Rudy are, oh, the questions disappeared, suitable for diverse diseases, I think the question said.
Yeah, we get this a lot, do you need to bespoke? If you actually look at the literature, we know so little about rare diseases. We don't even know what the frequency of sleep disorders are in some of them, or general quality of life, how many people are in pain, what's the fatigue scores. So I always have a very enthusiastic patient who'd say, we want to ask all of these questions. And I say, can we just start with the basics and get the basic evidence base sorted, and then we'll build on that, because you'll never know what you find. So we ask tiredness, mental health, sleep, fatigue, quality of life, activity of daily living, and pain. And we're developing a COVID questionnaire, and we're developing a hearing questionnaire.
Thank you. And I have a question for Neil, actually. I was wondering how you deal with consent at Action Duchenne, considering that maybe when parents give consent when they have children, how does that transition as the children grow up and become adults themselves?
So that is consent is an interesting one. Okay, so in the UK, again, I'm talking about the UK, but so you're absolutely right. So our registry accepts people from young age. So typically parents consent. When people get older, we ask the individual to consent. There is an intermediate step, which is one I think we'll probably be deploying in the future, but it's a slightly trickier model, especially with the system we've got at the moment. But the ideal is you ask for initial parental consent, then you ask for patient assent when you feel they're, or when the parent feels they're old enough to give it, and then you move to patient consent. So it's a bit of a moving target. It's a tricky one. And consent, especially for us, we're very careful. So we don't give out individual data, for example. We only ever give out aggregate data. And so anything more complex than that, we have to go back and individually consent. And that's something we'll do if we need to. But consenting children or consenting the children is easy enough because it's parental. It's consenting those people in the middle. That's where it gets slightly tricky.
Thanks, Neil. Finally, a huge thank you to all of our speakers and to Healx for collaborating with us on this webinar. I hope everyone who attended today found it really helpful and learned something. So thank you all for sharing your insights and experiences with us.